Good evening. Tonight on Newshour, we begin with a significant shift in global trade diplomacy. India and the European Union have recommitted to sealing a long-stalled free trade agreement by the end of 2025. Now, the pledge was made following a high-level meeting in Brussels between India's Commerce Minister and EU Commissioner. Both sides expressed urgency in pushing through outstanding issues, from tariffs to digital regulation and environmental standards. But this is more than a trade deal. It's a signal. Delhi is reaffirming ties with Brussels at a time when its relationship with China, despite both countries being BRICS members, remains tense. From border standoffs to ideological divergence, India appears to be moving away from Beijing's orbit, aligning instead with the EU on strategic trade diversification. For the EU, India represents a massive market and a critical partner in its Indo-Pacific strategy. For India, this is a hedge, a bid to assert strategic autonomy in a world fractured between rival blocs. We ask tonight, can the deal be done? And what does it reveal about the wider global realignment? First, let's take a look at the latest developments on this story.
Union Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal met with European Union Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security Maroš Šefčovič in Brussels to discuss the progress of the India-EU Free Trade Agreement, FTA. Both leaders reaffirmed their commitment to concluding the long-awaited trade deal by the end of 2025. The discussions focused on enhancing market access for businesses in both regions and strengthening trusted, diversified supply chains. The aim is to ensure that the FTA is not only strategic, but also mutually beneficial for the sustainable development of both economies. In a social media post, Goyal described the dialogue as highly productive, stating that it helped redefine the India-EU partnership. He emphasised that the agreement would boost innovation, improve competitiveness and support future-ready investments and mobility between India and the EU. Both parties highlighted the importance of a fair and comprehensive agreement that supports shared prosperity. They also acknowledged the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in moving the talks forward. The India-EU FTA has been under negotiation for several years. If concluded, it would be one of India's most significant trade pacts, opening up major opportunities for exporters, investors and workers from both regions. The meeting in Brussels signals a renewed push from both sides to overcome remaining challenges and finalise the agreement within the proposed timeline.
OK, let's hear now from our correspondent on the ground. Rebecca Bundan is in Mumbai for us. Rebecca, good to see you. Let's get into this then. What's the political narrative in India around this agreement?
Well, this does come against the backdrop of India and the EU being very concerned about the potential impact of US President Donald Trump's tariff policy. And of course, as India and China's relationships remains very strained as well. So India is looking towards new trading partners, and the EU is a very important market that makes up some $130 billion of annual trade in terms of bilateral trade of goods between the EU and India, and it's understood that there is the potential to boost that massively, which is the idea of a free trade agreement, which is under negotiations. But however, what we have to remember is that these negotiations first started back in 2007 before they were put on hold in 2013 because the two sides failed to see eye to eye over market access, and then they were resumed again in 2022. But there does seem to be this new sense of urgency, more of a priority of trying to push this deal through because of the current global trade situation and because of concerns around that and the uncertainty there.
Yeah, very interesting. What's been the reaction specifically from Indian business, Rebecca, and I'm thinking particularly of those sectors of agriculture and technology.
Yes, on the one hand, the idea of the free trade agreement that's under negotiation for the EU and India is that it will help businesses. And Indian businesses, many of them are optimistic because the idea is that it should improve competitiveness for sectors including clothes, for example, or steel products, pharmaceuticals, goods that go from India to the EU. However, on the other hand, there are these really, really big concerns, and particularly in the agriculture sector. And about half the population in India depends on agriculture for their livelihoods. But the worry here is that with this potential trade agreement that India seems committed to securing by the end of this year, that could open up market access for the EU to potentially dump subsidized produce into India that's then at lower market rates. That impacts the rates that farmers are getting in India. So they are concerned about that. There are also these issues around non-tariff barriers as well. Now, these include environmental regulations in Europe, carbon tax, for example. And the worry here is that it could potentially increase costs for those businesses that are exporting to the EU. So these are some of the reasons why it has been such a complex matter. The negotiations are ongoing. There's going to be another round of talks between the EU and India on May the 12th. They still seem to be very committed to trying to push this through by the end of the year, but it is incredibly complex and there are a lot of factors here under consideration.
Yeah, very complex indeed. Well, Rebecca, thank you very much for bringing us up to speed there from Mumbai. Okay, tonight we have an EU analyst from Paris and an economist from New Delhi joining us. But first, let's head to Paris and speak with Pascal Mass. Pascal, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Newshour. I wanted to ask you, what's changed in recent months then to push this long-stalled agreement finally forward?
Well, so there was a common wish from both sides, from the European side and the Indian side, to have a better commitment in exchange, in market exchange. But it was weakened by administrative reasons. And because of the decision from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to make a complete revolution in trade tariffs and customs taxes, India became more attractive to European, and on the other side, the European were more interested in India than before. And so for these reasons, the World Commission Committee of the European Commission went last month to Delhi to have some chats with the counterparts from India, and then the Indian Commerce Minister came to Brussels to arrange this trade agreement, a free trade agreement. But it's a long way, but it's getting running faster than before. I must also put something on, is that there is the IMEC, the Indian Middle East Corridor, which is an investment for making new, what the Chinese said, Silk Roads, but it's Indian roads from India to Europe, through the Red Sea, and this project was not stopped, but it was not so as fast developed as it is now, and investments are coming from both sides, and even the United Arab Emirates are supporting financially this program, and this will make a real revolution in trade between Indian subcontinent and Europe. And this is for this reason that the two parts are speaking and acting in a faster way than they have been doing before.
Yeah, very interesting. How important then, how central is India to Brussels, particularly in regards to their Indo-Pacific outlook? And what role does BRICS play in all of this?
The BRICS have as you know, BRICS is not like the European Union that makes decision on all items. BRICS is only a club, and everybody makes what he wants with the partner he chooses itself. But the question is that China and India and Russia belonging, they are the founders of the BRICS community. Well, so of course, the decision made by the American presidents are completely against China, not against India. And I must stress on that. Last week, Vice President G.D. Vance visited India, and with his wife, who is from India as well. And the talks between the Vice President and the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, were very warm. And so India might be a new economical force in the area. And you mentioned Indo-Pacific, that's sure, but do not forget that India is displaying its presence in Africa as well. And there is a real wish from the Indian government to display partnerships all around the world, but beginning from their geographical position. It means Indian Ocean, of course.
Strong positive intent then on both sides, Pascal. Yes. What are the main obstacles then in that are still holding back this final deal? Well, it's maybe on agriculturals. It has been said in the subject before, because of course agriculturals and food is a major problem for India. It is the most populated country nowadays, and since the year 70s, India has always made as a priority to produce food for the population. So, as Europeans are facing exactly the same system, the same problem with agriculturals, but not for the same reasons, there might be a new partnership, which was not even thinkable 2 years ago. And for sure, India is now recognized also as a high-tech country, and especially in networks and space technology. And due to the policy of the Indian government since the independence in 1947, not to be strongly aligned on one bloc, this is the non-aligned countries policies, which has been created by Prime Minister Nehru. India always had some different partners, not to be in links exclusively with UK, for instance. And that for this reason, this agreement is very important because it includes all European countries. It is not only a partnership between France and India or Germany and India as it had been before. It's the whole European Union which is concerned by this agreement. This is really a fantastic revolution in the relations, economical relations between the sub-Indian continent and Europe. Yeah, very positive indeed. And do you think then, Pascal, that this agreement could be the EU's most significant bilateral deal of the decade?
Probably, because considering the volume of exchange and the volume of trade which is possible, because India is also now a financial power, this might be one of the most important agreements of the decade, or maybe of the first part of the century.
Wow, amazing. Well, we'll stay tuned and we'll keep an eye on developments. Thank you, as always, Pascal, for helping us unpick what's going on. Thank you again for joining us on Newshour. Okay, joining us now from New Delhi is Mr. Surajit Mazumdar, who's an economist. Mr. Mazumdar, thank you again for joining us. We're very pleased to have you on the show.
Pleasure.
Why is India making this push now, especially amid BRICS tensions?
Well, it would appear that the reasons that have been already mentioned on your show, that it is concerns about the implications of the actions of the Trump administration that has suddenly imparted some urgency to these agreements. But in my view, though I'm not privy to what exactly is going on within the government and in the negotiations, in my view, this particular new context, while it may impart some urgency to these attempts to negotiate a deal which has been stuck for a long period of time, I think the chances of getting a deal, at least on the Indian side, which would be considered favorable and which would have wide acceptability within India, appear to me to be very difficult. And I'll give a set of reasons why that is the case. First is, of course, in any such negotiation, you have to keep in mind that this is not a negotiation of a deal between regions which economically are similarly positioned. India is still in the lower half of the lower middle income category of countries. So while it has a large population and therefore a large economy, in per capita income terms, there's still a long distance between India and Europe, and therefore there's a whole development agenda that India has to confront, which is distinct, which is not necessarily the kind of issues that the EU would have to face. The second is that India is not just a lower middle income economy, but it is facing two major problems. One is what in India is called an agrarian crisis. It's an economy where still 45% of the population depend on agriculture, but the ability of agriculture to sustain such a large population is increasingly coming under strain or difficulty. And most importantly, India is also one of the most prominent cases of what is called premature deindustrialization, which is that its industrial sector, which was never a very large segment of the economy, is also something that is, in relative terms, shrinking now. And India's growth has been based largely on services and construction activities rather than on industry. Now, what is the other, this is also associated with what has happened as far as India's trade is concerned. So India is also a country with a trade deficit. In that sense, it is different from, say, China. It's a country with a significantly large trade deficit, though it is true that the 2/3 of that deficit is in India's trade with East Asia, with China being the biggest contributor. With most economies in the EU region also, though with the over EU as a whole, India has somewhat a surplus. With many of the economies in the EU, India has a deficit also. And India has basically been in a position where it has relied on, it has not been able to achieve export-led industrialization. What has in fact happened is that India's industrial sector's integration into the global economy has been very import intensive. Where India has managed to compensate for these deficits are in its services trade, its exports of services, and also remittance earnings from Indians working abroad. And their most important source is the United States. And the United States is also the one major economy in the world with whom India has a trade surplus in goods also. So in a sense, India is facing a problem of the loss of its major source of net foreign currency earnings, which it needs to compensate its deficits with other parts of the world. And it's not so simple to assume that the EU can substitute for that when the EU itself is also looking for alternatives in the context of the issues that they are facing with the United States. Yeah. So India's to find an agreement here which would be consistent with addressing the issues faced in Indian agriculture, with the issues being faced with regard to Indian manufacturing, it's very, very difficult given that, after all, in such negotiations, EU will also have its own interests in mind. So all the issues that have so far held up the signing of any kind of an agreement, I think have become even more serious in the present context. So therefore, I am less optimistic that there will be a deal, and if there is a deal, that it will have widespread acceptability within India.
And you talked there about difficulties, issues being not so simple. Perhaps another area that also fits that profile is dealing with the EU and the rules and regulations which come as part and parcel with that. Of course, there are many benefits, but we know there have been demands on labour, on sustainability, on data laws, on technology. How is India viewing that particular challenge?
See, that's in fact one of the key areas where difficulties are likely to be faced, because ultimately, as a developing economy with the conditions that it has, what is the basis on which India mainly competes? If it is not able to, it's at the moment happens to be competing on its relatively low wages in India. And if you introduce issues like labor standards, then of course India's position is altered in terms of its competitiveness. And the only way India has to address this problem is that if it has to address this, it has to move away from relying on exports as the basis for its industrialization and growth to a more domestic-oriented concern in which you can address these labor standards. But that doesn't necessarily make for a free trade deal, because it means that, so the choices India has, either it seeks to compete in the world economy primarily based on cheap labor and the absence of so-called labor standards, or it has the option of relatively closing its market, access to its market to imports, and seeking to use its own domestic market as the basis for its expansion. But neither of these choices necessarily make for a path to an easy deal with the EU.
And finally, let's just talk about another strategic choice, this pivot possibly away from China towards Western partners. What do you make of that? How significant is that?
Well, I think that the issue of India and China has been something that has been an issue for a long period of time. Historically, there is the issue of the border dispute. And also, I think that these differences have got exacerbated in recent times because of very, very different kind of insertions into the globalized economy. And India is now facing a problem that it has such a large deficit in its trade with China. And that is the reason why India is not willing to and has backed out from the Regional Comprehensive Economic Program Agreement, which was an Asian region agreement so it has in effect not been able to participate in the regional story of Asia to the same measure because of these differences. So that is an issue that is kind of central, and because of these historical reasons, as well as the fact that India is actually dependent on the West to compensate for its deficits with the East, has already made India's position on this somewhat more ambivalent on all these issues which so-called divide West and East at the moment. Yeah. So India is going to be kind of trying to walk different tracks. It's not easy for it to lean fully on either one of these sides.
Yeah, strategically, very complex situation. Mr. Mazumdar, thank you very much indeed for your analysis and for joining us on Newshour.
Thank you.
Well, as talks intensify then and negotiators set their sights on a year-end deadline, the India-EU deal is emerging as a litmus test not just for trade, but for the geopolitical soul of the global south. Will pragmatism prevail, or will politics once again halt progress? We'll be watching. That's all for today from everyone here at A News. Goodbye for now.